I'm sitting here with Gitte Gravengaard, who is Associate Professor and PhD at the University of Copenhagen. And Gitte is doing research in communication advisory and how it has developed. Gitte, welcome and thank you for participating in this interview. And let me first ask you, why did you decide to focus on this topic?
Well, first of all, because I think it's a very, very important area. I mean, communication is such a vital part of our lives and of an organizational life. And there is not actually much research on the topic. So those two things combined meant that I would like to find out what is a good communication advisor, how do they think, how do they act, and how can we use this knowledge to educate better communication advisors in the future.
One of the conclusions of your research is that we are facing a big shift in the way that we work. What is the change that you see in your research?
Well, communication advisory started somewhat in Denmark, at least around the 60s. And at that time, they were very focused on text. We have to write this letter so that the citizens can read it. Then 20 years went by and they found out that the text is not an autonomous thing. It's written in an organization with restrictions and possibilities, so they had a focus on the organization. Then 10, 20 years went by and then they found out, oh, organizations are actually interaction, so they have a very interactional perspective that everything in an organization is actually interaction. And then the newest development, we call them paradigms. So the newest emerging paradigm is paradigm 4. The fourth paradigm, where we have this digitalization, big data, everybody's heard about that, artificial intelligence, and so forth.
What part of the change would you say might have the biggest consequences for communication advisors in the organizations?
Well, if we look at this emerging new paradigm, I would say big data and all this data connectedness in your daily work. I think that will be a much greater part of communication advisors' everyday practice, actually. But we still also have social media. I know they're not that new, but many organizations are still struggling in order to find out how to perform their strategy. And also we have this visual turn. Everything is video, like we are doing a video now, right? So on social media and everywhere else, you can actually say that's a whole new shift, that visual turn, the video. And combined with the social media and the speed, we have to react much faster than we did just 10 years ago.
Yes.
And then, sorry?
Oh, please.
But I would say there is also one more difference, and that's connected to the relation between the communication advisor and the people he advises. Because in the old days, it was the expert coming into the organization, saying this letter is not good enough, I'll write a new one, and then we'll implement a new way of writing letters. That's not enough anymore. Now you have a much more linear relation, you can say, where the advisor and the advisee are much more collaborating in what we call co-creation processes.
So, as you just said, I mean, data seems to be the new big thing in this change, and a very integrated part of the way that we work as communication advisors in the future. Could you maybe explain a little bit more about what this will mean in a more practical life?
To work with the big data?
Yeah.
Well, you need to, as a communication consultant, you need to have a new knowledge. Somebody call it digital intelligence. You need to know what is data and what is big data. But you don't need to create it yourself. Typically, you have a person in the organization, or you have a bureau or experts, IT experts coming from the outside to create a setup. But still, the communication consultant is so important in terms of finding out what data do we need, how do we get this data, and when we have this data, then how do we implement it in our communication strategy and organizational strategy, perhaps as a whole.
Yeah. So Me maybe being a communicator in an organization, what can I use this data for? How would that improve the way that I work?
Well, actually, many people, as I mentioned earlier, are a little bit afraid of this big data turn. But you could also turn it a little bit around and say, oh, this gives me actually the knowledge, some very important knowledge about my members or customers or whatever, that enables me to communicate more individually to them. Because if you know, in the old days we had interviews, we had focus group, we did surveys, and we still do that. But now we can see from a website or something else, geological data, where are people when they do this, when do they step out of our website or something like that, and then you have much more information. So actually it's easier to be a communicator. So that's the other hand.
So you would say it helps me as a communicator to know my target group better and be able to adapt to that.
Yeah, and then you can also combine this knowledge with perhaps automation. We have Danish insurance companies who write their standard letters and combine them with automation, so they know where their customers are in their life cycle. Have they had a new job? Were they divorced? Pension? Many things. And then they have this standard letter, but it's automated, so they don't need to do anything. And then if you combine this automation with artificial intelligence, then the computer actually gets more and more clever on this target group. So one of the new projects in Denmark is a Danish media house called Herning Folkeblad, who together with a ED Digital Solution, a big IT company, has made Netflix for newspapers, you can say.
Well, it certainly are new times, and I guess that maybe a lot of the communicators who are a little bit afraid of this might be that this is so new to a lot of them. But I also heard you say that it's not necessarily the communicator, him or herself, who needs to do the data production. Is that right?
Of course, as a professional communicator, you don't have the professional knowledge concerning IT, data mining, data warehouse. You know, there are so many technical words. So you need to have somebody who knows that. And if it's a small project, perhaps you can have an IT person from within the organization. But the two examples that I mentioned before, you need to have somebody from the outside being specialists in this. It's a huge project. But it gives you very, very important knowledge that makes you as an organization able to create relevant communication, because there is so much noise these days, right? So we're talking about tailoring communication to our target groups, but not as a target group, actually as an individual. And this is what the big data can help us do.
Another interesting part of your research is the relationship between the communication advisor and the customer, or the advisee, as you call it. Could you describe that a little further?
Yes, it's a very interesting development that we see within other businesses as well. We have in the old days, the advisor was the expert who entered the organization, found out what's the problem, how do we solve the problem, implemented the solution, and said goodbye again. So he or she was the expert with the important knowledge. So there was actually a hierarchical relationship, you can say. What we see nowadays is a much more equal relationship, where we work after principles from co-creation, from design thinking, where the approach is that the practitioners in the organization have a lot of important knowledge on what they do. The expert also has a lot of important knowledge, professional knowledge, you can say. And then you combine these two. I call it the knowledge creating relation, because together 2 and 2 makes perhaps 5, or 1 and 1 makes 3. You know, the result of this collaboration results in much more sustainable solution when it comes to communication. And then they involve the people in the organization much earlier in the process than usually. So actually we have a new value chain where perhaps organizations and perhaps their customers or members or whatever they are, their target groups, are also involved in finding out what is the problem, finding out what could a solution be, and how can we implement the solution. So there are much more parties involved in all these three processes.
Talking about the knowledge that our customers might have, would you say, is that also, are they more aware when it comes to communication and communication skills than maybe previously, or is it primarily that they know much more about the problems in the organization? What is your impression?
I would say it differs actually, but there is no doubt that many organizations are much more aware nowadays that communication is important. So they are willing to put resources into enhancing the quality of their communication. And then, of course, the communication consultant has a new role, from being the expert who knows everything to a professional co-companion, you can say, actually, in developing something with somebody else. So that's a new role for the communication consultant as well.
This new role also asks for new skills, new competences. What would you say are the primary competences that communicators need in the future?
In order to facilitate these co-creation processes, I would say two main skills are needed. First, a special way of thinking. You can say a mindset that the overall thinking about some kind of project is that we need to involve people, and that it's not terrible to involve people or even dangerous, because what might happen there is that the professional communicator thinks that by involving everybody else, I'm demonstrating that I'm not good enough to solve this problem myself. So you need to be aware of your own professional skills and rely on them. And then it's actually a kind of democratization of the working process, you can say. And it creates more sustainable solutions. So the mindset, the way of thinking, not being afraid, putting yourself out there. And then more concretely, we can say you need the tools and the knowledge about how to create these processes. You need to do that in some way where you have actually thought about how do I involve these people, because it might sound a little bit easier than it is in reality, because often we see conflicting interests. So you really need to have the skill to involve co-workers, management, perhaps customers and yourself, perhaps other people that are professional communicators, into one thing where they need to feel involved and taken seriously in the process.
Would that be to be a facilitator, for instance? Is that those types of skills that you're aiming at there?
Yeah. So, and then you can say, this is not all you need to do. Sometimes you need to be the expert to say, this and this is the right thing to do. So actually you can say that the role of the communication consultant has developed and evolved into being much more complex than, as I mentioned in the beginning of the interview, just writing a text so that the citizens can understand what the authorities write to them. So now we see a much more blurred image actually, and that causes actually the demand for more skills and more competencies.
Obviously, you have talked to a lot of communicators about this research and the shift. Are they ready for it, and how do they respond to it?
Well, first of all, they know it's there. They are aware that this development is taking place, and they seek knowledge about it. But when you look at Danish as well as international surveys, this is also the things that they need competences for. These are the things that they are insecure about. How do we use data in our communication? How do we use big data? Automation, artificial intelligence, as I also mentioned, are things that they are a little bit not skeptical about, but they really need to find out, how can I use this? So they need knowledge, and they need knowledge on how to use it.
Last question. What should an advisor absolutely not overlook in the future development of their role?
Well, I think the things we've talked about during this interview are actually essential. I mean, data, big data, how can we collect data and use them in an efficient and effective way? making or creating relevant communication to our consumers. Point 1. Point 2, being able to integrate the use of social media to the business strategy, the communication strategy, also integrate video. I mean, some experts are right now calling video not a genre but a new paradigm, because this visual turn has made pictures and moving pictures so important in the future communication. And also adapting to the speed, because in the old days you could get a complaint from a customer by letter, by written letter, and you could answer tomorrow. Now you need to answer within 10 minutes on Facebook, because otherwise you might be in a shitstorm. So that's also very important. So those are the two, you can say, technical core skills. Then there is this facilitator role that we discussed a little earlier. To be able to facilitate these processes, to be able to create a role and an identity for yourself where you're not afraid of putting yourself out there. You're not afraid of involving others, because it actually gives the best product. So that would be a summary of what we talked about now. And then I haven't even begun talking about the increasing demand of communication consultants knowing the core business, you know, the numbers, the Excel sheets, stuff like that, and also a new tendency also arriving right now, the psychological side of the communication consultancy. Those are also two areas and two competences that we would see rise in importance in the future, I think.
Well, thank you. Very exciting future. Thank you so much for participating in this interview, and the best of luck with your research. Thank you.
Thank you very much.